Hi, and welcome back to our channel. Today, we're talking about conditional sentences in English. We'll go over the basic structure and differences in meaning between them. This video may work as a revision if you've studied the structure before, or it can be an introduction for those of you who haven't seen the sentence pattern. As I'm sure you know, English grammar is full of rules and exceptions to those rules. But conditional sentences actually follow a set pattern which should make them a bit easier to learn. The main similarity between the conditional sentences is that they all tell us what would be the outcome if something happened. There are 4 types of conditional sentences: zero conditional, first, second, and the third. And here are some of the examples. As you may have noticed, these 4 sentences are made up of 2 parts, or 2 clauses. The 2 parts are called the if clause and the result clause. The first part in each of those sentences is called the if clause because it contains the conjunction if. The second part of the sentences, the result clause, is the outcome that may take place if the if clause happens. An extra trick that is good to know is that the if clause and the result clause can actually be switched around in all of those sentences. So we can say, if it rains, the roads are slippery. Or we can say, the roads are slippery if it rains. Okay, now we have looked at the basic structure of the sentences. Let's take a look at how they differ in meaning. The main difference between the sentences is the kind of event they talk about. For example, zero conditional sentences are used to talk about situations that are always true. We can't argue about those things because they're facts. This is the easiest and simplest type of conditional, and both parts of the sentence are in the simple present tense. Some of the examples include, if it rains, the roads are slippery. If you hit water, it evaporates. You get blue if you mix yellow and green. Next is first conditional sentences. They are talking about the events that are likely to happen in the future. So, for example, if it rains, the roads will be slippery. So in our example, it is possible that it will rain, right? And so if it rains in the future, it is very likely that the roads will be slippery. As we're talking about the future, we use the verb will in the result clause. Now we are moving on to the more complicated structures. The second conditional sentences are about present situations that are not real. In other words, we're imagining that the present situation is different in some way. For example, if it rained, the roads would be slippery. In our examples, we are imagining that it starts to rain right now. And if that happened, the roads would be slippery. However, is it raining right now? No. We're just imagining that the weather is different. As this is possible but unreal present event, we use the simple past tense. Because we're imagining this event and it is not real, we use would in the result clause. This makes the sentence structure a bit more complicated than the previous 2 conditional sentence types. Have a look at a few more examples to help you out. The student would be more energetic if he had coffee. If he fell, he would hurt himself. If you love me, you would buy me a sports car. An extra trick that is good to know is you can use could or might instead of would in this kind of sentences if you want to make it sound more like a suggestion rather than something so certain. Here are some of the examples. You would buy me a sports car if you love me. It might be a sports car if you love me. You could buy a sports car if you love me. Finally, the third conditional is used to talk about past situations that didn't actually happen. Here we're imagining a different past situation. In this way, the past perfect tense is used in the if clause to show that the event has been completed, while would is used once again in the result clause because the event is imagined. So for example, if it had rained, the roads would have been slippery. In our example, it didn't actually rain, but we're imagining that it did. We can see that it is different from the second conditional because the past tense is used in both if clause and the result clause. Here are some more examples. If you had listened in class, you would have understood. If it had opened on Mondays, more people would have visited my science museum. We wouldn't have had a garden if we had lived in London. An extra note about the third conditional is you can also use could or might instead of would. Here are some more examples of that. More people would have visited my museum if it had opened on Mondays. More people might have visited my museum if it had opened on Mondays. More people could have visited my museum if it had opened on Mondays. To summarize the important similarities and differences between the types of conditional sentences we have talked about, let's look at summary table. In terms of the basic structure, every type of conditional sentence has two parts. It can be an if clause followed by a result clause, or the other way around. For the condition, as we mentioned earlier, the zero conditional is always true. It is used to talk about scientific facts or things that are certain. The other three are all about possibilities, with the first conditional being used for events that are pretty likely to happen in the future, and the second conditional being used for situations that might happen in the present but are not happening right now. Finally, the third conditional is used for past events that did not happen. Looking at the grammatical aspect of these sentences, we can see some major differences. As the zero conditional is for facts that are always true, it uses the simple present tense throughout. The first conditional switches to the future tense in the result clause because it is describing possible future situations. The second conditional has a more complicated structure. For the if clause, we use the simple past because it describes an unreal situation, but it switches to the simple present in the result clause. And finally, the third conditional uses the past perfect tense because it talks about past actions that have already been completed. One final thing you may notice is that zero conditional sentences have no modal verbs, and the first conditional only uses will to talk about the future. However, we can switch the modal verbs around from would to might or could for the second and third conditional sentences. Now, to check you've been paying attention, try to name the following types of conditional sentences as they appear on the screen. We won't give you long to guess though. We will stay home if it snows. A red light comes on if you press the main button. If I had more money, I would buy a new car. If you heat ice, it melts. If I had won the lottery, I would have bought a house by the sea. If you left now, you would catch the last bus. That's all for today. Good luck with the rest of your studies, and see you next time.